So, let's talk Scout in New Vegas. Now, I am gonna talk about this with the premise that Scout is the courier, not some random NPC in the background, because I've heard a lot of people talking in my comment sections about who these characters would be, and sometimes it goes into strange other territory that isn't really relevant to which faction they choose, because I got a lot of comments saying Soldier should be in the Enclave, and realistically, maybe, but like, if he was the courier, he wouldn't have the option to. So we're starting with this logic. So Scout would be an interesting character to build from like a special perspective, because if I was making the choice, I would actually give him less than the average amount of special stats, because I think you'd want to put Scout's agility quite high. You'd want to put Scout's perception quite high, but everything else, I feel like if you use the standard special array, then Scout would end up being average at everything, and I don't think you'd want Scout to be average at everything or good at too many things. I think it's like 32 special stats overall. Because everything starts off at 5, if you use some of the stats to like put agility and perception up, you'd still be left with 5s across the board. And then once you've taken out all the stats from strength, endurance, charisma, intelligence, you'd be left with a bunch, like, just you can't put anywhere, and I wouldn't feel comfortable putting them all into luck. Because I don't think Scout's quite the lucky guy. He wouldn't be winning high at the casinos as much as he, like, would really want to be. Because in TF2, although in the game, Scout is quite destructive and quite strong when it comes to his combat abilities, in, like, sort of the comics universe, Scout is... He gets shot on a lot despite how actually practical he is in-game. Everyone always jokes about how unlucky he is all the time. Scout doesn't excel at anything besides shooting guns and running fast. Those are the two things Scout can do properly. He can't do anything else properly. He can't even read. Now, when it comes to traits, I think you'd want to give him built to destroy and small frame, because we want to make Scout basically as much of a glass cannon as possible, because this guy can basically not take a bullet. If Scout is being seen in any way, he is going to get absolutely destroyed. There is no, like, tankiness whatsoever with this lad. You could optionally give him, I think it's loose cannon, where like throwables go super fast, but like, I can't imagine there are many throwables in the game Scout would really be able to use, so I don't really know. And then for tag skills, you want to go guns, because obviously, I think it's either unarmed or melee. One of them gives you like a throwables buff, because I feel like Scout, you know, I just said there aren't many throwables, but I feel like it's something he does quite a lot, so you'd want to give him the option to have throwables. And then I think sneak. And the reason I think sneak is because, number one, he wants to be like dear old dad. And number two, Scout in the game, in TF2, relies a lot on flank tactics, so I think that'll be a way to make him practical, to give him, you know, the ability to actually flank practically. Because if Scout just runs up behind people, they're going to see him, like, basically instantly, because I'm pretty sure that's how line of sight works in New Vegas. But if he can at least sneak and get, like, sneak criticals off, that would mimic his flanking techniques slightly, even though, you know, if they saw him remotely, he'd take a bullet to the face and die instantly. So that's build stuff out of the way. Now I kind of want to talk about more of the character stuff when it comes to Scout, because I see a lot of videos where they're like, oh, can you play this character in New Vegas? But I'm always more interested in what would the characters choose, what choices would they make, because I think that's quite interesting from like character analysis perspective. And I think Scout's an interesting one to start with, because Scout is very big on personality. He's very... You know what Scout's going to do at any situation. He's quite predictable, ironically enough. So, Scout, he's this little courier. He gets shot in the head. Scout wakes up, find out what's happened. That fucker is going to immediately want to go for revenge. I can't imagine someone shoots the shit out of Scout. He's not going to go like, I want to fuck that guy in the asshole. You know what I mean? Because Scout famously has an ego, and if he was going to survive in the Fallout universe, he'd obviously need to be semi-decent with guns, because you'd need to be that good to survive that long. So, despite Scout's, massive overconfidence, he'd have some reason to believe that he would be able to go find Benny, hunt him down, and beat the shit out of him, and take his shit back. But I can't imagine Scout would be too sort of methodical about it. He'd be the sort of character to be like, I'm gonna go the most direct way possible and not think about it too much. Like, I could imagine Scout getting into the local conflicts and doing side quests if they immediately jumped out to him as important, or if he got something out of it, obviously. But like, I think if Scout didn't have to do something, he wouldn't, like, waste the time on it, essentially. So, for example, the first quest you do, Ghost Town Gunfight, I think Scout would immediately jump to do that because, Scout, he's a horny motherfucker. He sees a bunch of ladies being threatened by these powder gangers, and he's going to want to immediately prove that he's got a 4-foot-long dick, even though he doesn't. That we're aware of. Maybe there's a cosmetic somewhere that gives the exact dimensions of Scout's penis, but I'm unaware of them right now. Because obviously Doc Mitchell sends you to Sunny Smiles to teach you how to shoot. And I can imagine Scout immediately having an awkward flirting session with Sunny. You know that 1TF2 comic where the director is showing people around and he's just sat there flirting with Miss Pauling? That's the sort of shit I'd imagine going down with her. So when Scout shows off his epic rifle powers and they get back into the Prospector Saloon, Scout sees Joe Cobb threatening what is effectively Sunny Smiles' mother figure. You know, Scout's gonna want to show how big his balls are and how much of an epic Chad he is. And he's gonna want to take on the Powder Gangers. So I can imagine him going up to Cobb immediately, basically shooting his head off and going, I killed him, we did it good. And I know Trudy sort of replies with, well, thanks, we didn't ask you to do that, but okay. Well, now I guess we've got to fight the Powder Gangers. So obviously Scout's kind of pulled into that because he wants to prove how much of a Chad he is. And realistically, Scout doesn't have the ability to pass any of the, you know, the checks to make the townsfolk more effective in combat. So I think it wouldn't go down too well, if I'm honest. I think a lot of townspeople will be shot. I think they'd end up coming out on top of the Powder Gangers because the Powder Gangers have like shit all armor and they've got like no fucking range. But at the same time, I think Scout would basically leave the town in sort of shambles and just awkwardly have to move on, which is kind of how I imagine him handling most things in the Mojave. Going forward, effectively, I'd expect Scout to kind of be the simp of the Mojave, no joke. I feel like if a woman asked Scout to do anything, he'd immediately jump to it, provided she's moderately attractive and young. Scout ain't after that old lady Ussie, to my knowledge. For example, I think Scout would have to go to Primm because of the main quest, but I think the second Scout frees what's his name? Deputy Beagle, who's voiced by Medic, coincidentally enough. I think Scout would literally move on the second he could. Like, he doesn't care about securing the town. Scout just wants to know what he can get out of the situation, so he would move right along the second he knew where Benny was going. Law is not being brought back to Primm, and Primm Slim is not being the epic sheriff he always wanted to be. The hero we need. But then I think Scout would move swiftly on. I think he'd definitely get tricked by Jacqueline when she's having the fight with Jack about the, what is it, the star bottle caps. He'd get shot at least once in the back. I think he'd win the fight, but he definitely would get tricked. I don't think Scout would then have the tankiness to be able to take on the Legion at Nipton. I'm gonna resist making a femboy joke for one video for a change, and then Scout would head right straight back up to Novak. He wouldn't have the epic romance skills to convince Manny Vargas to give him the information, so he'd have to do Come Fly With Me. Now, Scout might be impatient, but I don't think he's a cold-blooded killer, so he would definitely attempt to help the ghouls, just because that's probably the option he'd pick over murdering them, like Manny Vargas kind of asks you to do. I don't think he'd take the peaceful solution with the Nightkin, though, because I'd imagine by the time Scout gets to meet Davis, he's probably, because Davis will automatically attack you, I think if you've killed 2 of the Nightkin wandering the halls, and I can imagine Scout basically clearing them out before going to the left, so he would be forced to take the violent approach there, but he'd probably help the ghouls very impatiently. Fortunately, Scout runs quite quickly, so he'd be getting the extra supplies to get the rockets to go in pretty quickly. And then the second he's out of there, Scout was immediately running off to Manny to get his information he needs to find where Benny is. I think he would ignore Helios 1 because I think he'd be very driven to get his revenge on Benny, and he'd end up in Boulder City quite quickly. Now, I'm gonna be real, I think Scout would get all the hostages killed. There's no, like, negotiation skills with Scout. He'd just run in, probably fuck everything up, get everyone shot, kind of drag himself out with a platinum chip in his teeth, so it would end up pretty cleanly. Khans are dead, everyone's dead, but Scout, essentially, who probably just barely survived. I did realize I did just call it the platinum chip. I do mean Benny's lighter. So, then we'd move on to Freeside. And Freeside is the best place and the worst place for Scout, because Scout is a mercenary. So, you know, Scout's good at following commands. He's good at, like, being, you know, you tell Scout to do a thing, he does a thing, he gets the money, basically. However, Freeside is also a den of vice and villainy. So, you know, Scout's got lots of opportunities to gain caps and lose caps, essentially. So, he gets in there, he's got to go past the gate check. And Scout's dumb, but he understands that bullets hurt, bullet die. So he sees the Securitrons mow down that random guy that tries to run in and decides, maybe I should get in there a safe way. Now, I think the only real way Scout would be able to make it into this trip would be through getting the passport from the king. Because I can't imagine Scout would be not impulsive enough to waste all his caps at the casino or on whores. That's also a Scout thing. Scout likes him some prosussy, so realistically, he'd have to do the job for the king to be able to get into the strip. Now, once Scout actually gets onto the strip, he's very distractible, so it's a good thing Victor's there to go, hey, meet the boss man, don't get distracted. And Scout, you know, again, Scout does as he's told. He goes up there, listens to House first before he goes to jump to Benny. And I think Scout would be initially quite impressed by Mr. House, because Scout, you know, he likes his material possessions. He's gonna think, ooh, I can get all the money, I can be the richest person. However, you know, Scout's still a lovely, impulsive fella, so what'll probably happen is Mr. House would be, remember, be subtle. And Scout will be like, I get you, be subtle. But then I can't imagine Scout being subtle in the slightest. He'd barge into the tops. He wouldn't even bother checking his weapons. He'd be like, no, I'm going after Benny. And Benny would probably escape. However, this is where things get a little bit weird, because in chasing Benny to his little room to see what's going on, Scout would come across Yes Man. And I can't imagine Scout and Yes Man would be a good combination by any means, because Yes Man can't say no. So he's going to start filling Scout's heads with all these ideas of, oh, you can take Benny's plan, and you can take control of Vegas. And now, I don't think Scout's ego could handle the idea that he would be in control of Vegas. I don't think Scout would think for more than 5 seconds about being in control of Vegas. He would just go, shiny thing, me get, yes please. And the funny thing I think about Scout wanting to be in control of Vegas is it's entirely a short-sighted thing. I can't see Scout being politically minded in any way, thinking about, ooh, I've got to build up good alliances, I've got to build relationships, I need to make sure people like me, I've got to be a good ruler. He would just go, all of this, it's for me. Now, I could do an entire comic series just going over Scout and Yes Man's adventures in the Wasteland. Honestly, the more I think about it, the more I kind of love these two's dynamic together, because Scout is the infamous dumbass, or the infinite dumbass. And Yes Man, he's got to oblige anything Scout tells him, but we know how stupid Scout is. He can't even read. Someone in my comments on one of my other videos about Scout and Yes Man said that they could imagine Yes Man spending half an hour trying to explain to Scout how to insert the platinum chip into the Lucky 38 console. And I just can't disagree, but also, I'd watch all half an hour of that. That would be the most entertaining thing in the world, because Yes Man, he's got to remain polite and astute, and he can only really, reject Scout in any way passive-aggressively, but I don't know if Scout would honestly be intelligent enough to be able to perceive that, you know? Now, this is really the event horizon of Scout's time in the Mojave, because although Scout will probably get the bunker up and going, he'll upgrade the Securitrons, and his Yes Man stuff and Vegas stuff will be heavily secured, I think the rest of the Wasteland after Scout's in charge would end up just descending into pure anarchy, because he's not going to waste time getting rid of the Fiends, dealing with the Khans, or anything like that. I highly doubt he'd make any sort of attempt to save President Kimball or make the NCR like him in any way. So, reasonably, that second war Mr. House was talking about would reasonably happen, because they're going to blame Scout for everything. They'll be like, oh, some madman took over Vegas. And I reckon the NCR would, the NCR would be knocking on his door in 10 years, but never mind. The show says they got nuked. So, oops. That's a good point, actually. So my thesis throughout this whole thing was essentially that Scout was going to be kind of fucked. But if they're going to nuke the NCR, the only real problem Scout's going to have are going to be more localized ones. So never mind, actually, he might be okay in the end. He might end up turning into, the Nevada warlord or something, who uses his army of Securitrons to basically take over the area. So, you know what? I realized my thesis has been completely wrong. Never mind, Scout would be fine. Fuck it. Member shoutouts time. Thank you to Irrational Sloth, Brandon Ferretti, Tuckett Flane, Thrawn1, Gamera, Commie the Cockroach, Johans, Stephen the King, the man who sold the world, Jacqueline, Makov, Toilet Egg McMuffin, Thy Knight,